Hello, welcome back to my virtual sofa. Wonderful to see you again. And my guest today is the principal oboe of the Stamford Symphony, Melanie Feld. Melanie, hello, how are you?
Oh, pretty good.
You're looking very well. How is the lockdown and isolation treating you?
Uh, it depends on my mood. You know how I like to complain, but I'm doing a lot of walking. I've lost 12 pounds. I play the oboe every day, just a little, so as to not forget how. And we're cooking a lot, which we never had before. So,
Well,
considering.
yeah, I know. It's been a long time and we're all missing being together and playing and being in the Palace Theatre and so on. But you're looking great. And we've got a special conversation today, I think, because we've called this talk The Anatomy of a Reed. And we're going to talk about how you make reeds and how a reed works to make the sound in an oboe. But let's just go back a minute to the oboe itself. Did you choose the oboe to play or did it choose you? How did you come to be an oboist in the first place?
When I was a child, they had music aptitude tests. I failed. Then my parents moved to the other side of town, and a different school. They said, "What instrument do you want to play?" I said, "I failed the music test." I would have been 8 years old at this point. I said, "I failed the music test." They said, "We don't care about that." I didn't know what any instruments were. I'd heard of a clarinet, so I picked the clarinet, and I was pretty good at the clarinet. So after like a few years of elementary school, being a brat in music class, there was another girl who played the clarinet. We were the ones who were good. She switched to the bassoon, and I was jealous, and I wanted more attention. Probably I was 11 then. So I said, well, I'm going to switch too, but I don't want them to know I'm copying. So I picked the English horn. I learned about the English horn from music appreciation class back in the day. So they said, you cannot play the English horn. You have to play the oboe first. And so that's how I came upon the oboe. It was ridiculous. And then for a few minutes, I tried to play them both at once. And that was a spectacular disaster, since the embouchure is very different. And I was, like I said, 11, and I didn't know how to switch back and forth. And I liked the oboe better.
But the oboe is supposed to be one of the hardest instruments, along with the French horn. It's really hard to play, isn't it?
I think it's much easier than the French horn. The French horn, I always think those people are smarter than everyone else, because I believe they have to hear the notes in their heads before they play it. I don't know how they do it. I think they're all geniuses. Of course, this is going to lead us into the reed thing, because I think that's what makes the oboe difficult, is the reed. If you have a reed that works, you can play the oboe. So, I mean, the other thing that makes it hard is the reed has a tiny, tiny, tiny opening, and you're blowing lots of air into a tiny, tiny opening. And it's exhausting, and you get dizzy, and it's kind of a crazy thing. So I guess that makes it hard also.
It's always amazing to watch oboe players in particular. I think this applies to all woodwind players, but you must have incredible lung capacity. Some of the phrases you play are incredibly long, and you have to project and play quite loudly. That has to be a workout.
Yeah, it has to do with the reed. Some reeds project better than others. This is one of the ways you figure out if this reed will work for this purpose or that, or if you throw it away. I always want to say you have this enormous amount of air that you're putting through the reed, but I'm not at all sure that that's true, because you have an enormous amount of air in your gut area that you're using for support. But I think that the amount that actually goes through the tiny opening isn't so large. That's why you can spin out the long phrases, I suppose. I think a flute requires more air. They're blowing and they have to breathe all the time. Because you just, and for us, it's more like you're blowing through the little aperture.
Okay, so let's look at a reed and tell us the science of how it makes the sound.
I didn't even know where to begin. It's called a double reed. I will make a funny sound for you. That's a crow. That's actually what we call it. Of course, this is a finished reed. And then you blow into it. It's open at the end, and you blow through the reed. There's so many variables. This opening is a nice opening. Not too big, it's not too small. All the ways things go wrong. The opening is too big, the opening is too small. If it's too small, it's hard to get much noise. If it's too big, it's really hard to control it.
Let's ask a fundamental question. Why do oboists make reeds in the first place? I mean, can you buy them ready-made? Can you buy a box of them or what?
Not a box, but it's an interesting thing. More and more young oboists graduate from music school, and then they start a business selling reeds. So there's more and more reeds available for sale. It used to be you would buy them from the local music store, and they would really be terrible. They would have an unattractive sound. So really, you start learning to make reeds very early on and learning how to play. You could buy reeds. They're quite expensive. I'm going to say I think they're approximately around $35 per reed. And then they don't last that long. But also the way you play the oboe, it's all very individualistic. So you'd have to find a reed maker that makes reeds that work for you. And I've tried a few here and there, and they haven't really been right. And I haven't tried that hard. I feel like if you make them yourself, you have a lot of control over the whole process.
And does a good reed work on any instrument, or is a reed very connected to the particular oboe you're going to play?
Yes, it is. I've always had to make reeds for my instrument. I have more than one oboe, but I've never used more than one concurrently because I find I'd have to make different reeds. I play on Laubin oboes, which are great, and they resemble one another, but they're not the same. So I figure it's hard enough to keep myself in reeds for one oboe, so I just...
Well, we're going to show some photographs as we go through, and you talk us through the process. And I was struck by all the paraphernalia you need, and your work desk, and the knives and things, and it's a real industry by the look of it.
Crazy.
But it all starts with a piece of cane, right?
Yeah.
And you buy a bag of these things, or what?
Generally, you buy it by the pound. This was a pound at one point. It probably is still close to 1 pound. And we're always trying to find this magical thing, the cane that's going to make good reeds.
What sort of wood is that?
I think it's bamboo.
Right. Uh-huh.
Wind chimes. They're like wind chimes.
Uh-huh.
And it used to always be grown in the south of France. It has to have a particular climate. Then there was some really great cane that grew in Napa years ago, but then that field was sold to a winery because wine was more profitable. And I think, Spain is one place you can get cane. We do have a picture of just a bunch of pieces of cane just to illustrate, of course, what it looks like in its original state, but also that it comes in different lengths. They pick it from the cane field. I have no idea. But this is how we get it, and so then there's this whole process. One thing on my mind these days, maybe not relevant to this, is just that, people want to say, well, how do you, how accessible is it to be a classical musician? A lot of times it comes down to cost. It costs a lot of money to take lessons. You have to buy an instrument. And when I was taking these pictures of all my stuff, I thought, you also have to buy a lot of stuff. And it's quite expensive. And when I say $35 to buy a reed that might work for an hour or 2 or 3, that seems terrible. But then you buy a gouging machine and maybe that's $2,000. And you buy, I'm trying to think. There's a planer. The planer is cheap. You buy that at a hardware store. You buy the little staples that you tie the reed on. That's $4 for one of those little guys. That sort of thing. Everything is a fortune. A knife could be $50 easily, if not more.
Okay, so you've got your bag of reeds that you've bought, you've got your equipment. Talk us through each stage of how you actually start from that piece of reed to having a piece of cane, rather, and you finish up with the perfect reed.
Yeah. Okay, so the first thing is you have your tube cane, and the tube cane comes in lots of different lengths. It also comes in a particular diameter. The diameter is really important as to the final opening of the reed. So you have to have instruments to, you buy it a certain size and then you have to measure it anyway to make sure it's right. So once you have your tube cane, then you have to split the cane. I split it into two pieces, to 2 halves. And then after you you do that, then you have to cut it to the right length. So of course there's a tool for that. It's called a guillotine, a lovely name. And that guillotine, of course, is made so that it cuts it to the proper length. So after you cut it to the right length, then you have to plane it on your planer, or you can call it a pre-gouger. Basically, what you're doing is you're making the cane smaller and smaller and smaller from its original state. So you put it through the planer, and then you have pre-gouged cane. And then after that, you use your gouging machine and you gouge it. I think if you didn't plane it first, the gouging machine blade would wear out very, very quickly. This is another tangent that gouging machines don't stay in adjustment because by definition, every time you use it, you're using that blade and the blade is gradually, slowly eroding and changing its shape. It's a curved blade. This is just yet another instrument of torture because eventually the reeds stop working and it takes a while to realize, oh dear, my gouger is messed up. And then you generally either get a new blade or you get someone to adjust it. And here's another thing I forgot to mention is that all along the way, things can go wrong with your cane. And this is really important. So things start going wrong in the pre-gouging process. This is when you can start to weed out the stuff that isn't going to work. So you put it on this planer, and sometimes if that cane is warped or crooked, it'll go flying off into the sunset. It'll just go flying off the planer while you're planing it. This always elicits some shouts from me. It's a noisy process. And but then at least you know, okay, that piece wasn't going to work anyway. When you put it on the gouging machine, that's another thing. You put it in, it's called the bed. You put it in the bed of the gouging machine. If it doesn't lie flat, if it doesn't fit right, then you just throw it out because it's never going to work. So then you gouge it, and then you have to shape it. And this is why you can't always buy wreaths. Everybody gets used to a certain shape, and each shape has different qualities. So the one that I use is very wide. It's wider than most oboists play on. If I wanted someone to make wreaths for me that I would pay for, I might have to give them my shaper actually to use. Shaper tips are also really expensive. The last time I bought one, $125 for this tiny little piece of machined metal. So you fold it in half, you put it over the shaper, use your razor blades. I buy them 400 at a time at Home Depot because I don't like going to Home Depot. So I learned over the years, it's best to use only one razor blade per reed. And then once it's shaped, well, then we have this picture of the staple and the shaped piece of cane. So then you have to tie the cane over the staple. This is the only fun part because this is where I have all my spools of thread. So I have lots and lots and lots of thread, and I love having all these different colors. Some people say you shouldn't have yellow because yellow reeds never work. But I just take whatever the spirit moves me. If I can't make a decision, I reach into the drawer and I grab something. You tie the cane onto the staple. That's hard to do. Everything is hard to do, honestly. Maybe I'm just not very technically oriented, but you have to do it just so that each side is even. It has to close because you're closing it. Basically, when you have the finished reed here, it has to be sealed on the sides so there's no air leaking out. The only air involved in playing is through this end, comes out the bottom, which of course is in your oboe. So that can be difficult sometimes. Anyway, so then once it's shaped and tied, then you just roughly hack off some of the cane with one of the knives. This is why I have so many knives. Then you cut off the end. And once you've cut off the end, then you have the double reed with the opening. So basically you fold it in half. And then once you cut it, then you have the two pieces that will vibrate against each other.
And if everything goes according to plan, how long does that process take? If it all just works perfectly, and I'm sure it doesn't sometimes,
Yeah.
but if it does, is that an hour, a day, or how long does it take?
I don't know that everyone does what I do. I don't do everything at once. Okay, so for example, last night I thought, I'll get into the mood for this interview and I'll prepare some cane. So what I generally do is I'll split it, cut it to the right length, pre-gouge it on the planer, and oftentimes that's when I'll stop because it's kind of boring. I'll listen to NPR, I'll put something on YouTube. It's just tedious work. It's not, this isn't the hard part. it doesn't take any particular skill, these things. And then sometimes I will then go ahead and gouge it. I did this yesterday just to kind of, so I'd have the process, right in my brain. The gouging gets a little hairy because, like I said before, the machine can act up. The cane I gouged last night happened to be not very good, as it turned out. It was really soft. And when it's really soft, the blade doesn't cut nicely through it. It kind of shreds, it makes these little, annoying shreds of cane. It takes a lot longer to do it. And then oftentimes those reeds end up not working. But in any event, so let's say I'll get it through the gouging process, but I never, ever make a reed right after I've gouged it. Because when I do that, for some reason, they always split down the middle. I don't know why that would be. It doesn't happen to other people, but over the years I've learned. And then besides which, it's enough. It's enough already. I've watched Colbert on the iPad. It's, I'm ready for something new. So the actual making of the reed is always at a different time. So then what I do is I start from the gouged pieces. Then I shape it and tie it and, do the rough work, cut off the tip and try to get it to the point that it's playing somehow or other. So that part, I would say, maybe takes between 20 and 30 minutes. I know people that do it much faster than me. I seem to be a little bit slow with the tying process. For me, that's quite difficult. And as I say, if you don't do that right, your reed is never going to work. So you really have to take the time. And then it's a question of getting it to play. You could stop. I always feel like I want to get it to vibrate. So it'll make that crowing sound, even if it isn't easy enough. And then I can leave it. I never finish a reed all at once either. I might get it to the point that I say, okay, this might work. I'll usually do that. And sometimes, it's just so bad. And you want to know if it's going to be so bad. You want to just know. You don't want to waste another day on it. So you get it to kind of play. And then you go, oh my God. And then you tell your husband about it. You go, oh my God, honey, I just made like one of the worst reeds ever in history. and then you can smash it, and that's very satisfying. But if you think there's a prayer for it, then you put it in your case on your desk, and then you come back to it the next day. And then you try to, finesse it to make it. It has to do so many things, in the end.
And can a reed die on you during a concert, or
oh, yeah.
or a show or something, and you just know this is going, and I've got to change it? And does that happen a lot?
Not a lot.
No.
I distinctly remember one concert, fortunately not with Stamford. It was with Westchester Philharmonic, and we were playing something beautiful. It may have been Debussy. And there were these beautiful oboe solos, and I loved them so much. And we were playing, and I thought, something's really wrong. And I have the solo coming up. But, in the middle of the piece, you can't change reeds. And the reed had cracked. Generally, when a reed cracks, it gets very flat in pitch, but it often won't play. So I managed to muscle through it. The miracle was it still played. And there was a violist sitting in front of me. That's usually where they are. And I could tell she knew, because I could see in her body language, this tensing up. And, I play at Phantom of the Opera. I've been playing for many, many years. And I think it's happened a couple of times. I remember once it was an English horn reed. And when things happen at Phantom, I like to document them. Because, when you play the same music over and over, it's kind of the same. So I write in the part, the date, the year, English horn reed cracked. But the fact that I can tell you about these particular instances shows you it doesn't happen very often.
Yeah. And how many reeds a year do you think you go through? I mean,
Sure.
Lots and lots by the sound of it.
Heavens, I have no idea. The other thing is I have all these cases of reeds that I carry around with me. That's one reason it's hard to answer that question, because let's say each case holds 20 reeds generally. Right before the shutdown, I definitely had at least 4 of those cases, and I would carry all these reeds with me. And some of the reeds might be more than a year old. And the reason, I'm not really answering your question because it's hard to, because depending on what you're playing, you need a different kind of reed. Reeds, they die on you because you're playing on them using your saliva. Sorry, but it's all about the spit. Mm-hmm. And eventually the fibers of the cane break down. So you have like this whole life cycle of a reed. So there's a reed I made a few days ago, and it's quite hard. The cane is hard. The reed is therefore hard. I'm not playing for anybody these days, so I'm just playing here. So I'll play the reed in a little bit. That means I'll play my scales on it or something. And then I'll try to play a little music, and it's like, oh my God, I can't even get through this music because my reed is hard. Maybe it's too hard for a while, but then it's really nice. And when it's really nice, that might be a really good orchestral reed. But if I have to play a Bach sonata, that reed is going to be too hard. Because a Bach sonata, you're playing from top to bottom, there's no rests. And you need a special reed. You need a really, really old reed, completely broken in, completely broken down, and yet somehow still sounding good and playing in tune. And that's why I have so many reeds, because who knows?
Well, I think it's absolutely fascinating. I've said on these interviews before, the silver lining of this COVID cloud has been that our Stamford audience has been able to meet members of the orchestra up close and personal like this, and hear a story that most of us had no idea was just so involved and complicated and yet essential. And it's just been absolutely fascinating to hear you talk us through it. So, Melanie Feld, stay well. We look forward to seeing you back in Stamford, and thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Thanks for listening. Bye.